Hey everyone.
Hi.
I just wanted to talk about something chill, something not so super intense, like is God dead and did I kill him? I've talked a lot at a very normal length on this channel about my journey out of Jehovah's Witnesses, but I haven't yet talked about an entirely different post-spiritual grieving process that I've gone through, which is losing faith in God and gods altogether.
I respect all religions of the world.
I'm Muslim.
Jehovah's Witness.
Atheist. The Lord is testing me.
So this is gonna be one of those videos where a guy talks about losing his faith in God. So if you're not into that kind of video, too bad. I was a Jehovah's Witness for 28 years and a believer in God, a theist, I think they call that, for about 30 years. It's really only pretty recently that I have completely lost my faith in any kind of God altogether. And it was not a straight line. There's a narrative that exists within the XJW community, and even among active witnesses, that people who leave the organization just automatically become atheists, which I say no. Some of us take a while to get there. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, my faith journey. What do you call that? Lack of faith journey. Journey to hell, which doesn't exist.
Hi.
The TLDR reason why I don't believe in gods is because I don't have any compelling evidence to believe so. But the tricky thing when talking about not believing in God anymore, losing faith, is that at some point in your life, you did feel you had convincing evidence, but you no longer find those reasons convincing. Now, there's no question that losing faith in the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses played a large part in my journey to becoming an atheist, but I don't think that they're as connected as you think. Stop thinking a bunch of shit about me. Hope you're not distracted by the ring light in my glasses, because I am, so I might just take them off. I've been hesitant to make this video because I know I have a lot of Christian subscribers to the channel, and people of other denominations and faiths, or people who are spiritual but not religious. And I'm not spiritual anymore either. I really don't believe in any other kind of plane of existence, any other external source of energy that a person can tap into or whatever. I also asked my subscribers on YouTube to submit a few questions, so I'm going to be getting to those 3 months later. Losing faith in the organization and losing faith in God are definitely related, but they're not necessarily interchangeable. I didn't lose faith in God instantly. Or at least I thought I did, but then I didn't, and then I did again. Allow me to explain. Losing faith in the organization necessarily, in my opinion, means that you lose faith in Jehovah as they present him. Because part of the deconstruction process for leaving Jehovah's Witnesses is realizing that when the organization in publications and videos say Jehovah, that word can always be replaced with the governing body or the organization.
The governing body could be likened to the voice of Jesus, the head of the congregation. So when we willingly submit to the faithful slave, we're ultimately submitting to Jesus' authority and direction.
Everything that they say Jehovah wants you to do is also very suspiciously the things that the cult leaders want you to do. And so it's easy to see God, at least Jehovah God, as a surrogate for the cult, and so you lose faith in that completely, at least in my opinion. And because a huge part of my questioning of the religion at all was in their stance on LGBTQ issues, gay marriage, and so forth, that was something that felt like it was directly in the Bible. So when I first started doing research into the organization, I kind of immediately decided, well, I guess I'm an atheist then too, because I don't believe this stuff in the Bible about gay people being bad. But then I started to make friends and reconnect with old friends, and some of them were just as liberal as myself, but were still Christians, which was surprising to me because they struck me as critical thinkers. And I think right out of the gate, I found myself very enamored by the idea that critical thinking equals you are an atheist. And I don't think that's true. I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. Really, it can be very flattering to go from one thing where you feel like you were definitely right, which is that Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth, to jump to another thing where you're told that you're absolutely right, which is that there is no God. Now, that's not to say that those two claims are equal in any way. What I'm saying is that my draw towards atheism initially didn't actually come from a place of genuine skepticism on my part and really investigating my interiority and beliefs and why I believe the things I believe. I think I was initially drawn to it because it did play to my ego. Now, I say that because sometimes I will listen into call-in shows and see videos on Christian channels that pop up on my feed, unfortunately, about people who claim that they used to be an atheist, but now they are Christian.
Every year, there's people that were atheists, agnostics, that have come into the truth.
What are you doing here?
What? I work here.
I thought you quit.
What? Quit? Who quit?
And whenever I hear that, and this is completely me pulling an opinion out of my ass that I don't have because it was surgically removed, I don't think that their atheism was ever really defined by deconstructing their beliefs and why they believe the things they believe. I think that when people say I used to be an atheist and then I started believing again, I was that guy. So let me tell you what kind of guy that is. It's a guy that didn't actually really pay that much attention to the content of atheists' thinking, or thought of atheism, I should say more accurately, as some kind of belief system, which it isn't. It is a single position on a single issue. It is very simply the lack of belief in deities. That's all that is. And when people get attached to atheism as some kind of personality or overarching part of their ego, I think that those kinds of people do tend to get roped back into religion, because religion is way better at playing to your ego than atheism is, which just says, hey, we don't know that a God exists. While we're getting into semantics, I would call myself an agnostic atheist.
What religion are you, Jeff?
I'm agnostic.
Gnosis meaning knowledge, theist meaning God, or something I fucking heard on Matt Dillahunty's show. I don't feel certain that there isn't a God, but I do not have any reason to believe that there is a God, but I could be convinced if sufficient evidence was presented to me. I tend to agree with the Matt Dillahunty line of reasoning that is, I don't necessarily know what proof of God would look like to me. I don't necessarily know what that would look like. What would unmistakable proof of God be? Because I thought I had a pretty good reason to believe in God, and that fell apart very quickly. I like to think, though, that if there was a God that existed that truly wanted to be known and wanted to have a relationship with people and wanted to draw people to him, that he would know exactly what would convince me, and he would be able to show me that. And so far, I haven't seen that. But that's not a conclusion I reached immediately. I assumed I was an atheist because I disagreed with a lot of claims in the Bible, and I did not believe it to be historical fact, which I had difficulty with even as a witness. So when I started talking to my liberal Christian friends, remember when I had brought up that as the next point? Oh boy. I realized that people have very different nuanced reasons for belonging to a religion or a faith system that goes beyond literally believing that the Bible is the infallible word of God and every single word of it is true and that it is history. What I started to become really interested in was like liberal Christian scholarship and literature. Like I was really into reading stuff by Marcus Borg and Richard Rohr. I know I've got Marcus Borg book up there on the bookshelf. He was a Bible scholar, and that book up there is called The Evolution of the Word. It's a very provocative title, but he basically reordered the New Testament in the order in which it's written, so you can kind of see the progression of how the theology changed. It's very interesting, and Marcus Borg is a very interesting guy. He's a guy who saw the Bible, I believe his words were, poetry plus, not science minus. That it was a book that was capable of expressing truths or truisms in the way that any book can do that, but it is not necessarily literally inspired of God in the sense that I would have thought of it as a Jehovah's Witness, where you're almost imagining God channeling and puppeteering the Bible writer, which is a very strange zombie-like, demonic way of writing a book when you think about it. This was somebody who professed a belief in God and Jesus specifically. We'll get to him in a moment. Mr. Jesus, wait your fucking turn.
Jesus Christ! What? Get the Escalade, we're out of here.
While having a very nuanced take on what it meant for the Bible to be true. That was very interesting and a very creative way of looking at the Bible. Richard Rohr, similarly, he's a Catholic priest, I believe, and he's written a bunch of books that are super lefty, hippie, dippy, egalitarian worldview stuff that I was loving.
Should stop using the word God for 50 years because that's the only way we're going to admit to ourselves that we don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
To have some humility around God.
And he was putting this spiritual vibe on it, and I think I found Christianity very appealing because while I had obviously very negative associations with Jehovah's Witnesses and didn't like being a Jehovah's Witness that much upon reflection, I liked the traditions, and I especially liked the comfort and coziness of having prayer and feeling a certain sense of belonging to a mythology. I think those are two things that I really connected with far more than feeling a personal relationship with an invisible creature. I would never really say that like I had conversations with God. Sometimes you'll hear people say that they feel that Jehovah was speaking to them. I never had that feeling. You would be thinking about a thing, and then you would hear that subject brought up in a talk, and by the transitive property, you'd think, oh, that was Jehovah. But what I never experienced, which I have heard some people do, is an actual supernatural encounter, something paranormal, something that I can't possibly explain. And that's something that I haven't experienced, and maybe I would feel differently if I had such an experience, but boy, I've really tried, and I feel like God's just not interested in giving it to me. Give it to me, God. Instead, what I did find value and comfort in was prayer. I found that to be very useful. I suffer from anxiety and depression, but I get really bad panic attacks and anxiety attacks, which I take medication for, and prayer was a pretty effective fallback for when all else fails. It was a thing where if you could just kind of constantly be in conversation with something outside yourself, it really did feel quite calming, and then any kind of validation you would get would feel like, well, hey, maybe that's an answer to the prayer. And I would sure like to think it is, because that would mean someone out there cares about me. Don't fall for it, kids. Nobody cares about you. No, that's not true. That's not the point of the video. And then the sense of belonging. I'm a reader. I've always loved reading fiction and fantasy and science fiction in particular. I mean, I talk about Star Wars all the damn time on this channel. I'm an obsessive Star Wars fan, and I'm a Tolkien fan. I'm a big fan of Lost, which a lot of people are wrong about it being bad, but it isn't. It's fantastic.
I think that's why you and I don't see eye to eye sometimes, Jack. Because you're a man of science.
Yeah. What does that make you?
Me? Well, I'm a man of faith.
And anything that has a real deep lore to it and a sense of connectedness, I find that very satisfying. And I think that religion had kind of fulfilled that, like almost like cosplaying as a Jedi or something. It's like, oh, you're really part of this important order, this system of belief that's endured all these thousands of years. There's something very comforting and communal about that I definitely understand why people stick around just for the culture and traditions. It's something that I probably would do if I had ever had a particularly strong belief in Jesus. So let's talk about you finally, Jesus. And you're always waiting to hear people talk about you. Oh wait, no, that's me.
Jesus Christ! What?
Even though I am now an atheist, I think I had the very common experience that a lot of ex-JWs have who become a different denomination of Christian, which is when you really dive into different translations of the Bible, you realize that the New World Translation is contrary to what you've been told your entire life, incredibly deceptively worded, and the message of the New Testament completely changes when you add in the name Jehovah over 200 times. It is very clear reading the New Testament that it is all about elevating Jesus. It is all about elevating him to the point of divinity. And I think that's very clear, even if you're, weird and wrong and don't believe in the Trinity. Another person, I should say, that was very influential in me wanting to remain a Christian and seeing a certain value in remaining Christian was the work of Ray Franz. I really loved Crisis of Conscience, and I really, really loved In Search of Christian Freedom, which I think is maybe even better. He is somebody who is very clearly a deep thinker, a very earnest and kind-hearted person. I think his warmth really comes through in the way he writes. And when you hear that guy talk about his faith, you just believe it is coming from a place of certainty and from a place of good-heartedness. I couldn't think of. It's coming from a good place. Good job, Ray Franz, and you're watching down on us in heaven. And one of the things that Raymond Franz recommends in Crisis of Conscience is rereading the Bible with a different translation. And that was one of my first goals when I first started waking up, was to really reread the Bible with the assumption going in that it may or may not be true, as opposed to the lens that I had my entire life, which is that it is definitely true, so definitely trust everything it says. I wanted to go into it with the understanding that it may or may not be true. Turns out, Old Testament, it's as boring as ever. But the New Testament is really powerful. I really liked the New Revised Standard Version and the way it was worded, and I found it very powerful. And I really felt like I was discovering Jesus and the power of Christianity through Christ's example or whatever for the first time. And in fact, that is how I found the works of Marcus Borg. He wrote 2 books. One is entitled, I think, like Discovering Jesus Again for the First Time, and the Bible Again for the First Time, something like that, because he is somebody who considered himself an atheist, or at the very least a very skeptical, non-practicing Christian, and ended up coming back and becoming a Christian again.
Every year there's people that were atheists, agnostics, that have come into the truth.
He took a non-literal approach to interpreting the Bible. And I found that very satisfying because it meant that I didn't have to throw away everything. I didn't have to throw away my entire belief system. Now, with reflection, I tend to think that that was some part of me just being really afraid to actually start from scratch. If I could justify to myself that, well, the Bible is, in a certain sense, true, I still have a relationship with God. If I have all of these Christian values, then it wasn't all for naught. Now, I realize that's probably what deep down inside was happening, but at the time, it was just really thrilling to reread this book that I had looked at one way my entire life, viewing it through a completely different lens, and I am very moved by words. That's probably a really fucking basic-ass thing to say. But I find reading to be very powerful. And I never had the relationship reading the Bible that a lot of people seem to. Like when I was a witness, I loved reading novels, but reading the Bible was just a chore. I couldn't read it for more than 5 minutes without being bored to tears. I found that now that it was a more interpretive work, and it was something that I didn't have to take literally, I found a lot of enjoyment in it. And I especially found enjoyment like in Psalms and in certain parts of the gospel, like reflecting on certain things as a form of prayer. I found very effective. I should say that I was immediately pretty certain that I did not like religion and didn't want to be a part of any kind of religion ever again. But I was interested in the idea of being just a Christian personally. And that came from a lot of people and friends and coworkers in my life who were that way, who I thought were atheists, and it turns out, well, no, I believe in Jesus, I'm a Christian, I don't like religion, I don't like church, so I believe in my own way. And I was like, hell, that sounds good to me. And they said, hell, and I was like, oh, sorry. So why did all that fall apart? Well, no matter which way you slice it, you really do have to believe that a man was raised from the dead, that Jesus Christ our Lord was raised from the dead. Do I really believe that a guy was raised from the dead? No. I don't really believe, no matter which theological way you want to slice it, that either a Jewish prophet was elevated by God after his death, or that God sent his only begotten son, or some Trinitarian pizza slice of himself down to earth, and then it shot back up on a pizza rocket from Pizza Planet back up to heaven. I think that's how a lot of evangelicals view the Bible. I really had an issue with that. I tried to go down the rabbit hole of what is the evidence in favor of the resurrection, and it just isn't any good. And truth be told, I just realized one day I was having a really bad day. Like, me and Christina, there was some kind of crisis going on with the family. I was at work and she was at work, and I was just so overwhelmed, and I went in the bathroom just to have a little panic attack as a treat and cry, and my gut instinct was to pray, because that's what my gut instinct had been my entire life. And I went to do that, and I just realized, I don't even know who I'm praying to. Why am I doing this? Do I really think that this is going to work? And the more I thought about it and the more I deconstructed, if I really had good evidence to think that prayer had ever done anything for me, no. It seemed to work at about the rate of chance. And that is, in fact, statistically true. They've done studies where they have measured the effectiveness of prayer, and it is about as effective as a coin flip. What I think happened when I deconstructed is that I had a completely literalist take on the Bible as a Jehovah's Witness. And then I had this very loosey-goosey interpretation of the Bible as more of a liberal, non-denominational Christian. On the evangelical side of things, where everything has to be literal and the Bible has to trump science or be in perfect corroboration with it, what happens is that God just becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, and he just has to fit into fewer and fewer gaps in the things that we can explain using science and reason. When you get to the more liberal side of things, where God is not to necessarily be interpreted literally, what I found for myself is that God becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where it's just the universe, and if all you're saying is that, I don't know, there's something out there in the universe, then what's the use of believing that, as opposed to just acknowledging that you don't have any idea if such a God exists? For me, as soon as you start positing an interventionalist God, it just conflicts with all reason. There's no evidence that it happens. It can't be demonstrated that it happens. And all we see all around the world are so many people crying out to God to intervene, and he doesn't. Little tiny babies die of starvation all the time. What the hell, you know? What the not hell that I don't believe in is going on, God, that I don't believe in? Who am I talking to, and what am I even talking? That was a sort of grieving process that I didn't anticipate, because when people asked me, and when I talked on the channel in kind of wishy-washy ways about whether or not I was an atheist, I basically would have said that I don't actually care. But saying that you don't actually care and coming to a place of I actually don't care is very different. Maybe it's not right to say that I don't care. I would care if a God existed. If I had any reason to believe that he existed, I would care, because I'd be like, well, why doesn't he do anything about all the bad stuff? But I don't have any reason to believe that there is a God, and I don't have any reason to believe that the Bible is of any value beyond the value of any shitty book you can read. I mean, I've got a lot of Star Wars Expanded Universe books on my shelves that I have gotten way more value out of than the Bible. The Thrawn trilogy, New Jedi Order, don't knock them till you try it. What I found is that not only did I not have any evidence that a God was intervening in my life or anybody else's life, but I didn't have any evidence that retaining belief in something that I didn't have good reason to believe was in any way beneficial to me. I have started to make more friends. I've started to become more active in my community in various ways. And in doing that, you're able to see the value in people coming together for a common cause that doesn't have anything to do with religion. And in fact, people of various different denominations, of different religions or non-religion, come together and do good things all the time. And that is incredible. That's worth living for. Seeing that people are able to come together and make the world a better place, even in spite of overwhelming odds, gives me a lot more power and strength than I ever felt from praying to an invisible whoever the fuck, who might eventually, in some vague way, suggest something to me through a book. And there are people who believe that God is everywhere. It's in the trees, and it's the energy between us.
Because I believe that everybody is Jesus, and he's all over the place, you
Everybody's
know.
Jesus?
Everybody is Jesus. Well, Jesus said, I'm everybody, so if you see somebody and you think it might be me, it is.
Well, then, okay, then God's nothing then. It doesn't fucking matter. If God is the grass, but God is also the grass that little kid is choking on. Don't you know the Heimlich maneuver? Go help that kid. Oh, great. You didn't, because God didn't let you know how to do the Heimlich maneuver. Now that kid is dead because you choked on grass, and God didn't stop that kid from dying, even though he's the grass and the kid and the death. So explain that, guy at the bar who is making me mad talking about how God is everything. When I think of my mental state as a Jehovah's Witness, it was incredibly doomery. It was just so nihilistic, or nihilistic, depending on who you ask. This world is terrible. Everything sucks. God, thank him, is going to end everything any day now and put all this shit out of its misery. There's no use getting involved in politics because all of the politics are bad, and they've always been bad. Except for the stuff that benefits us, but that's just a fluke. Anything good that happens is only temporary, and it can only really be made better by God's kingdom. I don't really have a problem with people having a religion if it doesn't prevent them from being involved in making the world a better place for everyone now. If all of your investment is in trying to pull people on your invisible arc so that they survive whatever the fuck's gonna happen so that you can eventually make the world a better place later, that I think is bad. I think you should be involved in trying to be a nice fella and helping the folks. I don't know. I also didn't want to talk about this because it always feels sanctimonious. It always feels like, oh wow, I'm so great because I discovered God doesn't exist or whatever. I don't know. But I've noticed that Christians never seem to hesitate in putting out their XJW videos about how they found Christ after leaving the organization. So I should be able to do the same thing, but on opposite day, which, as we know, is the day that I recorded this, or whenever you're watching. I'm going to jump in and try and answer a couple questions that people have. How do you reconcile the big questions we all seem to have, i.e. what happens when we die? Is there life after death? When did life begin? With atheism. When it comes to what happens after we die, and is there life after... Wait, that's the same question. When it comes to an afterlife, we have no way of knowing. We have no way of knowing other than what some people wrote in some manuscripts a long time ago that a lot of people seem to really want to believe in. You have the documentations of books that were basically coerced confessions from children who claimed to see heaven, but we also have scientific explanations for why people see endorphins when they die. So we have no way of knowing if there is an afterlife, so why bother worrying about it? You don't know about an afterlife. All you know about is this life. You know about this one right now. And you know that you're alive. And you know that someday you won't be. So to me, I find the idea of like removing an afterlife from the equation has been incredibly invigorating to me. It really makes me feel motivated in a way that I definitely didn't as a Jehovah's Witness. I would not describe myself as a witness as somebody with a particularly strong work ethic, at least not outside of work. I was not somebody who was always trying to get a bunch of stuff done when I got home. I was very content to just play video games and drink until I fell asleep. Because what the hell else did I have to do? Go out in service? Boring, lame, I don't want to do that. Read the publications? Well, again, they all say the same thing. So now that I've removed that, I have a lot more free time, but I also feel like I have a lot more to fill that time with, because the time that I have is precious. When it comes to when life began, you know, I believe that in the science of the evolution of species, when it comes to abiogenesis, when it comes to the Big Bang, we don't know for sure, but that's really not a particularly big question to me. Like, I'm alive right here and now, and I have to do stuff because people are still going to be alive after I'm dead, and hopefully their life will be better than mine. Abby the Apostate asked, I don't think you do this. Which, well, you didn't have the benefit of seeing the video you just endured. But some people get a little holier than thou, pardon the pun, about their atheism. Yeah, I do think I talked about this at the beginning of the video, but I think it comes from a place of self-consciousness almost. Like, now that I don't have a belief in God, I reflect upon, you know, the vast majority of how I spent my life for the last 30 years, and it's been pretty embarrassing. It's a lot of doing menial labor and singing silly songs to an invisible friend. So that's silly and cringe and embarrassing. And so the instinct is to go really hard the other direction and project a lot of confidence and strength. And there's nothing wrong with having confidence and strength in the things you believe or don't believe or don't have reason to believe. But I agree sometimes people can be sanctimonious. For example, me throughout this video. I don't know. Here's my counterpoint to myself from 2 seconds ago. When people release frou-frou podcasts that are 3 hours long about their liberal hippy-dippy spiritualism, people don't call it holier than thou. And when people post their How I Found Jesus After Leaving a Cult videos, people aren't like, oh wow, sanctimonious. But when people talk about why they don't believe in God anymore, suddenly everyone's like, whoa, Mr. Smarty Pants thinks he knows everything about what doesn't or does not exist. I don't know. I think that whenever you're talking about things that exist outside of our realm of understanding, it's just going to sound a little pretentious because it's so far removed from our everyday life. So I don't know. I think it's all sanctimonious. Don't watch this video. Go back and delete it from your eyes. Rafael Parisi says, how do you deal with death and aging? Do you sometimes feel any existential crisis in your life? What is your view of marriage now? Oh, well, that last one's very different. When it comes to death and aging, this is pretty specific to me. You can go back and watch other videos I've done, but I've had a couple near-death experiences since leaving The Witnesses, very close to my experience leaving, and that kind of gave me a real, I don't know, new lease on life. It gave me a new sense of energy about how I use my time and how I use my life on Earth. And I haven't talked about this really. I talked about it on a stream that I deleted, but I guess I'll say it here for the record. But earlier this year, actually, I had a self-harm attempt that ended with me in the ICU, and I almost died. And so that was really a wake-up call, because I realized, holy shit, I do not want to die. I almost died for the dumbest reason ever. It would have been such a waste. And I don't recommend that anybody test themselves in that way. Life's worth living, okay? Don't be fucking stupid like me. To me, it's specific to my experience, but I feel just incredibly grateful for the life that I have. And I don't want to, I'm not crying, I've been talking for like 9 hours straight. So death, aging, I think aging freaks me out more than death, actually. I just don't like the idea of feeling yourself decay a little bit. But I don't know, I've already experienced that a lot with health problems in my life, so I don't know. I know what it's like to feel shitty. I guess I'm not too worried about it. I've felt shitty before. My view of marriage, that's an interesting question. By the way, stay tuned for the next part of that video. Sorry, it's been taking me a long time to upload stuff. By that video, I meant my video with Christina, my wife. And no, marriage is awesome, and it's the same thing, you know. I just feel so incredibly lucky that I've found somebody that's worth spending my life with. And obviously, now that, well, I won't speak to her spiritual situation or anything, but I think we both feel a real sense of privilege about it, and also a real sense of urgency about using our life to the fullest while we have it. So it hasn't really changed my view that much. I mean, it hasn't really changed my view of my marriage. I guess this is more influenced maybe by my politics than my belief in God, but I do feel like marriage as an institution should not be impressed upon as this essential important thing. Like, you don't have to be happy to be married, and in fact, I think that we have found that our marriage is much happier when we are happy as individuals. And one of the reasons why I think our marriage is successful is because we got married late in life for witnesses. Like, we got married in our late 20s as opposed to when we were 19, like a lot of witnesses do. So we did know ourselves more than a lot of young marriages in the organization do. So I think that plays a part in it too. Like, we had a little bit more self-awareness going into it, so we lucked out in a lot of ways there. Micah Thompson asks, what do you think is the best / most convincing argument for / against theism? Also, do you openly tell non-witnesses that you no longer believe in God? If so, what is the general reaction? Best / most convincing argument, I think, is just the lack of evidence. You know, when you're 3 and your brain is a sponge and all you do is ask why? Like, that's for a reason, because it's like, that's how you develop your brain. And so anytime somebody says something like, well, look at the trees or something, which is a lot of what I would hear from my family as a witness, they love to look at things and say, look at what God did. And it's like, that dog came out of other dog's vagina. I saw it happen with my own 2 eyeballs. Simply demanding evidence that goes beyond faith. I think, you know, just like asking follow-up questions is like, well, why can you attribute that to God versus a natural process? to me just always results in somebody making excuses. And at best you say, I don't know, in which case the right answer is, I don't know. Do you tend to tell people if it comes up? Sometimes it does at work. I work with a lot of religious people. In fact, I would say most people in my area are religious, even those who are not particularly, I don't know, outwardly Christian. It's just one of those things where I'm constantly meeting people like, oh, you're religious too. Okay. And I would say that for the most part, people don't really care. I think for the most part, people don't want to get in a big argument because we're arguing all the time about everything, aren't we? Like, God at this point is like, oh, whatever the fuck. B asks, what parts of the Bible / teachings never felt right to you? I guess I didn't talk too much about the Bible because I never had a super strong belief that it was the literal word of God. That was something that I always struggled with, even as a witness, and to the extent I believed that it unraveled so quickly that I have to think it was never a really ingrained belief. So most of the violent things never felt right to me. Like, it just never made any sense to me that God would have to have people go to war and like wield swords and stab people to death. A very nasty way to kill someone. In school, we had to read accounts of the Civil War and like bayonets. Like, people just stabbed each other to death, like the Will Ferrell sketch where he's just stabbing. That's what it is to stab someone to death. And that's what God just had people do all the time. And women and children, and yeah, like all of that stuff just made no sense. I remember at a very young age being very concerned by the bear story. It seems to me that even if God didn't summon the bears, it's fucked up that he let a bunch of kids get killed by bears for saying a guy was bald. You know, I was a kid. I'd called people balds before. I'll do one more question because this video's gotten far too long. Who would have guessed that would happen? I've got a few questions. One, as an atheist, do you disbelieve all metaphysical points of reference? I don't know what a metaphysical point of reference would be. 2, what are your thoughts on the sustainability of atheism individually and socially? If I'm understanding the question, I think you're asking whether or not atheism can function as a system of morality, which it cannot, because it is just a single position on a single issue. I think the better question would be whether or not secular humanism is more sustainable than perhaps a religious system of beliefs, and I think yes. You know, I make no bones about it on this channel. I'm an American. I'm a citizen of the United States of America. I don't deify the Founding Fathers in any particular way, nor do I see the Constitution as a particularly good document even, but that there are things that I fundamentally agree with that I find as genuinely valuable guidelines to human flourishing. It is the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think those 3 guidelines encompass just about everything you need for what is good for humanity, and all of these things can be accomplished without the need for a religious order. 3, what are your thoughts on the relationship between industrialization / economic prosperity on the practical viability of atheism? Jordan Peterson, is that you?
Up yours, moralist.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what industrialization has to do with atheism. That was a bad question to end on. I'm not going to end on that one. I'll end with Daniel. What comes after losing faith? What is your value system now? How do you cope with not having clear black and white answers anymore? My value system now, I would say, would align with secular humanism in that I believe in human flourishing. I believe in the goodness of humans and for the need to view all humans as having certain innate value because they are human, because they exist. I think that humans are worthy of certain inalienable rights, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think those are things that every human being should have. Now, I'm not constantly going around my day, though, thinking, does this align with my value system of morality? I think for the most part, that is not something that comes up a lot throughout the course of a day. Now, when you're a Jehovah's Witness, the Watchtower is constantly painting these scenarios where you're like, you're at work, and a coworker brings up going out and getting drunk. Are you gonna do that? And then you're walking home, and some strange man in an alley offers you a cigarette. And then, on the bus home, a bunch of military men come in and say, we're going to shoot all the Jehovah's Witnesses unless you know the daily text. They're painting all these scenarios that are happening throughout all day, every day, where you're having to make a bunch of moral choices. And I find that that's not necessarily, at least how my brain works. When I'm going through the day, I don't feel that I'm often presented with good and evil decisions, or even a great deal of decisions that carry a lot of moral weight. To me, it's pretty easy to want to be a good partner to my spouse. It's something that I desire to do. I want to be a good, nice coworker because that makes my life better, makes everybody else's life better. I like myself more when I'm nicer, so why not be nicer? I don't know that I have a moral system beyond it's you should be nice to people and you should treat everybody as if they are worthy of dignity and respect, unless they fucking suck, and then fuck them. You can make fun of them. Not having clear black and white answers, though, is a really good one, because that's something that I obviously struggle with, and one of the things that I definitely realized is much more difficult after not believing in God is making good decisions, because it's good to make good decisions, and only for that reason, not because there is an invisible God who is judging you. I did find that it was a lot easier to make less, I don't know, stupid mistakes when I thought that Big Brother in the sky was watching me all the time. It's a lot harder to make decisions when you can't be like, well, what's the Bible say? What would God want me to do? Again, I don't feel like I have to make that many decisions that are involving the fate of humanity or the goodness of my fellow man. I don't know. I'm trying to be nice to people, and that's kind of it. I feel like that's kind of it, right? Isn't it just be nice? Unless they fucking suck, and then fuck them. That's kind of it. Why did I should have just said that like 3 seconds into the video. Sorry if you were a patron and you're Christian. I hope you don't feel that you wasted your money. I'll do one about Jesus just for you. Little babies die dead in a dead baby ditch, and all they wanted out of their little dead baby mouths was I can't say that. I'm sorry.